We're delighted to be joined by John Podesta, the former campaign chair for Hillary Clinton. Thanks so much for your time, Mr. Podesta. You were interviewed by the Mueller investigation. Do you have faith in that investigation that it will get to, well, basically the bottom of what it needs to, and will it be made public?
Well, I think that Mr. Mueller has really conducted a highly professional investigation. I think we don't know what the results are going to be. There could be a report coming as early as the next week or two. We could see more indictments. We just don't know. But I think he's kept it buttoned up as is appropriate, and he's done it with great professionalism. So hopefully we'll get his take on what the real story was. And with respect to it being public, the House of Representatives just voted 420 to 4, I think, to make it public. And I think that there's no question that the public will demand that. And I think that the Attorney General has some discretion about whether to send that to Capitol Hill. But I think in reality, Republicans have now joined Democrats in saying, give it to us and we'll make it public.
Yeah, is there any way that these calls can be ignored? As you say, it's been buttoned up for now. There's a lot of pressure on the Attorney General to unbutton this and make it public at some stage.
I just think this has been at the heart of American politics for the last 2 years. People know that the Russians interfered in the U.S. election in 2016. They want to see the results of this inquiry. Mr. Mueller has had access through grand jury, through subpoenas, through the testimony of a number of witnesses, and I think they want to know what he thinks about it, and I think that's appropriate, and they will. The demand is there, and I think they will have to be forthcoming with the report.
John Podesta, I want to ask you about the 2020 campaign. Is Russia a potential threat to that campaign? Would they still be seeking to make incursions in that sense? And should we be worried about that sort of issue? We've had hackings here at Parliament and our own domestic political parties as well. We've got an election 2 months away ourselves.
Well, I think there's no question that the Russians have decided that this has a high return on investment. They not only interfered in the U.S. election, there's evidence that they played around before that in the Brexit vote, that they were active in the French election. And there's no reason to think, given as I said, the high return on investment they got, a compliant president who sides more with Vladimir Putin than he does with the bipartisan consensus in America on a number of issues, that they're going to continue to do what they can do as long as they can get away with it. And so far in the United States, that's been plausible. I think with respect to Australia, there are other people have looked, and you have other neighbors, other actors who have great capability. So I think Australians should be concerned about interference in the election, the ability to not just target and use for intelligence purposes, hacking, but what the Russians ended up doing was weaponize the fruits of those hacks to get electoral outcomes that were favorable to Russian interests and Russian foreign policy.
So with an eye to 2020, I mean, with these risks still at play in the US and as you point out here in Australia, how do you suggest the Democrats campaign around that if there are still loopholes? And I guess I should ask you, who is the best person to take on Trump in 2020?
Well, look, I think that one of the things that's been disappointing in recent days is the 2 units in the Department of Homeland Security that were supposed to build up defenses against that have just been disbanded. But I think the Democrats have to make sure that the public understands it. I think there's a role for the media to give context and if these kind of activities go on again, as the French media did. And I think that Democratic candidates really have to argue for democratic institutions, the right to vote, against voter suppression and against voter interference. With respect to who's coming forward, we just had a new candidate enter the race, Beto O'Rourke. He's a very exciting young candidate from the state of Texas. We're waiting to see whether Joe Biden actually enters the race. I think the expectation is that he will. Right now, I think Biden and Bernie Sanders sit on top of the field, but there's a tier of exciting new candidates, new faces emerging. So I think it's 10 months away from the Iowa caucuses when the first people will go and caucus and vote. And I think it's hard to handicap who is likely to be the nominee, but I think we're in for an exciting race with the first debates taking place in June.
Well, we know Bernie Sanders and a lot of his policies have been picked up by some of the other younger candidates as well. And I want to get your sense for our viewers, how socialist elements of the Democrats and how far to the left can they drift and still be viable?
I think there's a sense amongst the American people that they want ambition, but I think they also want to know how those plans are really going to work in action. So there's no question that the United States still suffers, for example, from not being able to give health care to everyone at an affordable price. So they'll want to hear people's ideas about how you expand health care. That's what the Medicare for All debate is about. And I think particularly on the Democratic side, you have to be ambitious and have some real ideas about how you get in the game to fight climate change. You're going to have a student strike here today in Australia. That's replicated across America. People are very concerned about it. They've seen the effects of extreme weather, and they're looking for candidates who can be ambitious. Having said that, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for people to come up the center. I mentioned Mr. O'Rourke, who ran as I said, he did better than any Democrat's done in Texas statewide in a very long time, since the early 1990s. And he's run as more of a center candidate. So has Joe Biden. So has Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota. So I think people will be able to pick and choose. But I think that in the end of the day, there's one criteria that the American people really want more than other: who can beat Donald Trump. And I think they're going to try to consolidate their view about who's best able to take him on and knock him out of the Oval Office.
Well, do you have a view on who is best to beat Donald Trump? Because the two frontrunners, as you put it at the moment, Beto O'Rourke and Joe Biden, if he does throw his hat in the ring, look like the two most viable contenders, but they're very different. Beto O'Rourke is new in the sense of not being part of the political establishment. He's from Texas, which is an interesting note as well. Whereas Joe Biden could be seen as part of the establishment, as another arm of the Obama era. And does Joe Biden's history come with a bit of negative baggage, do you think?
Well, the person that I would put in the top tier as well is Bernie Sanders, obviously, who starts with a vote share in the high 20s along with Biden, ran in 2016. Both Sanders and Biden suffer from the fact that, Biden's 76 years old, Sanders 78 years old. And I think that as people are thinking about the future, where they want to go, their hopes and aspirations, I think that gives some advantage to this younger tier of candidates. But there are people who have already shown their ability, like Beto, but also Kamala Harris, the senator from California, who's a former attorney general and prosecutor, Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey. Those people have already got some traction. They're able to raise money. They provide, kind of different arguments about why they're the best choice for America. So I think until you see the debates and you see who can rise and who may not have what it takes, it's going to be hard to handicap. But I think our two front runners right now suffer from, just being of a different generation.
Yeah. John Podesta, you touched on this a bit earlier. I want to look at Donald Trump and his relationship with adversaries versus traditional allies like Australia, like Canada. And it seems, like Japan, another one, had very close ties with Japan in recent decades. But you look at his relationship
with Europe to
Moscow,
that mix.
And add Europe as well, of course, Angela Merkel. But I'm just wondering, is this going to create a trust deficit that will remain beyond the Trump era when it comes to allies and how we see Washington?
Yeah, I look back at President Bush's decision to go into Iraq, and the fact that raised questions amongst populations across the country. President Obama was able to restore, I think, America's position with those traditional alliances because I think he attended to it. I think it's going to be tougher, actually. I think people understand that the American political system, even though he didn't win the popular vote, it produced a president who is breaking China all over the world, really so shows no regard for nurturing the alliances that have kept us safe and prosperous since World War II. So I think people are going to hedge against the future of American politics, and it's going to be quite the chore of the next president if Donald Trump is defeated in 2000 to be able to re-knit and reestablish the trust that our traditional allies have had with American leadership.
Mr. Podesta, you've been in Sydney for a week now. You dipped over to New Zealand. There's upheaval all around the world. We've been reporting on Brexit this morning. What do you think of our political system and our politicians? Are you impressed or otherwise?
Well, look, I'm following both the state election in New South Wales and the national election, and I think that many of the currents that are running through politics across the world, particularly now that Australia is entering a period where this long period of growth is slowing down, where wages are beginning to stagnate. The debate is similar. What's interesting, at least at the national level, you were just talking about in your last segment, which is the self and internalized politics, particularly in the coalition and the Liberal Party. They seem to be shooting at each other more than they're shooting at Labor. So that's kind of different than that happens in America, but it seems to be what's really dominating the conversation here in Australia.
Yeah, you've been very diplomatic. John Podesta, thanks so much for your time. Enjoy your stay. We appreciate it.
Great. Good to be with you.